Warning, this podcast has stories of real-life events and true crime that happens every day. These stories may contain adult language and graphic or disturbing details not suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised. In our society, most people are content to go through their daily lives safely and peacefully. But our society is not always safe or peaceful. For that reason, some men and women answer a higher calling to defend and protect their fellow man. You probably know someone who is one of these people, or maybe you are one of these people. The ones who see and do the things most people would never want to. These things are sometimes heroic and beautiful, but often they are horrific and terrifying. It's these things they don't share about with other people. It's these things they carry with them, so you don't have to. But when they get together, they talk to each other about them. And they call these stories war stories. Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I'm Tom.
And I'm Chuck.
And on this episode, we've just discovered we're experiencing a bit of a delay. So you'll have to bear with us a little bit. But we've got Ken back with us. Hey, Ken, what's going on?
Not much, man. Just happy to be here.
Yeah.
I'm happy.
Yeah, exactly. We're happy to have you back. I'm happy because it's a beautiful day where I live now. And I just keep pinching myself that, why didn't I do this years earlier?
I'm not too far from you, and it's a beautiful day here. And I love where we live, kind of close to each other.
Yeah, the Pacific Northwest.
Kind of close. Yeah, and the coming from California and the summertime weather is in the 70s.
Yeah,
that's usually the highs.
They go like, wow. In the summer, it might get up to like 90 for a couple days.
For a couple days.
When I lived in Maine, it was 70 or 80 degrees in the summertime.
Yeah, it's much different up here.
It's much different. So, well, we've got Ken back for our How to Become a Cop Part 2. Now our schedule allows it. And just so our listeners are aware, you might hear us reference some things that might be a little bit of dry pie or might have already happened because we're trying to front load some episodes because I'll be out of pocket when making the big drive with all of my worldly possessions, which I still have to do, is drive that big old honking moving truck. So I'm looking forward to that. But we've got Ken back, and I'm going to start off by letting Ken kind of reintroduce himself and talk about his business and his background. So for those of you that are just tuning in, Ken, go ahead.
Well, I was on LAPD for 23 years, and then for 12 years after that, I was a background investigator for LAPD Backgrounds Working Personnel Division. And I have opened policebackground.net, and I help police candidates get hired. I review backgrounds and just do the whole 9 yards. We do oral interview prep and everything. So I've been doing backgrounds for quite a long time, and I'm always available to help candidates get hired.
And let me tell you, I was lucky enough to have some of my father and some of his cronies mentoring me through the process, but it was such a daunting process, even having law enforcement mentors helping me through it, that I can't imagine what it must be like doing it without a mentor to help you through the process. And with Ken, it's kind of nice because you can basically pay a mentor to help you through the process.
I know the process. I'm the only, and you know what's cool is I'm the only guy that does this in the U.S. and Canada. So I know I'm pretty sure I know what I'm doing. I've helped quite a few candidates.
Do you have anybody you've helped become an RCMP?
I've helped candidates. Three of my clients were from Canada, and I don't think any of them has gotten far enough in the process to get hired yet.
Gotcha.
No, okay, so RCMP is hardcore though, super hardcore.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, RCMP is Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And it's a really long name for Dudley Do Right. If you look, it's cool. I got flown to Florida at one point to be presented an International Narcotics Officers Association award with my partner. And when we were there, we met some RCMPs, and they were in their dress uniforms, the red tunic with the Mountie hat and the job. And it's still like meeting somebody in that uniform, even though they were just regular cops. The uniform itself was like, dude, I got to take a picture with you guys. Those are rad, you know. The RCMPs are like.
You want to hear a fun fact?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but there's a video on YouTube about the RCMP Academy. That uniform that you saw, the one with the red tunic and the boots and the little
the Dudley Do-Right
poofy pants and like that. That whole outfit, the Dudley Do-Right outfit costs $4,000.
No way.
Oh,
yep, $4,000 for the whole outfit.
And they probably got to pay for it out of pocket too.
Wow.
No, the RCMP pays for it.
Oh, nice. All right, because I know, like, officers in the military have to pay for their dress uniforms, right? So I thought it might be kind of the same way with the Canadian RCMPs. They are they're the premier law enforcement agency in Canada. They're like almost like their version of the FBI. If in the scope of what they do. So I actually had a relative who was an RCMP, and it's a neat organization as far as law enforcement goes. But let's start with a couple of emails, because we got some feedback when Ken came on the show the first time, and people were like, wait, is that Ken? And man, he's great, and he this and he that. So we actually got a couple of emails that from people that knew of you and had nice things to say about you. So, you must be a retired cop, because nobody says nice things about you when you're actually a cop, right?
Nobody did when I was.
That's right.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the people that are fans out there. Yeah.
So this says, hey, Tom, longtime listener, and I love what you guys do for the first responder military community. Anyways, just finished listening to part 1. Good stuff. As for myself, I am a police officer here in the greater Los Angeles area. After suffering through enough BS in a state I used to love, my wife and I decided to escape California, and we are currently having a house built, and I started applying to several agencies as an out-of-state lateral. So I was/am in backgrounds with the department. I received a call from my background investigator the other day informing that they would be essentially placing my background in a holding pattern due to a pending federal lawsuit. The lawsuit is BS and shouldn't really go anywhere, except it's going nowhere fast. My question is, should I even bother applying with other agencies right now, or should I wait until the unforeseeable future and the lawsuit is adjudicated before I start applying again? Keep in mind, I plan on moving out of state as soon as our house is done and commuting back and forth to California, which isn't going to be too bad, but I'm saying that without having actually done the drive for work yet. Feel free to share this on the podcast. Just change the name or something. So I'm just not going to read the name. And you know who you are who sent this. So it's an interesting question because it deals with lawsuits, right? But let's not just leave it at lawsuits. Let's talk about lawsuits or internal affairs investigations or anything like that could be at your current agency that could derail you from going to a new agency.
It's not an uncommon issue, but I don't know any agency that will complete a background investigation, much less hire you with a pending litigation or an open IA investigation. Even if you're totally in the right and you have newspaper articles saying that, the bad guy pointed a gun at me and I had to shoot him and everything is kosher without it being adjudicated in court, I don't know any agency that's going to process the background investigation.
Right. So that was kind of my thoughts. And I think the best advice is, you're probably going to have to wait it out and ride it out until you get to the end. That's a lot of liability to buy off if you're a department looking to pick up a new hire, even a lateral. And although they're looking at you going, it's a good guy and we'd really love to get him and we don't have to send him to the academy and he's got all this experience and all this training. The bottom line is that L word, liability, is a huge stop sign on the road to getting on with another agency.
Yeah, a big part of backgrounds is risk management, and they're not going to bite it off on that until it's all taken care of. Because even though you may have done everything right, there could be something that comes out in the trial that says that you did something maybe wasn't kosher or something like that, and it has to be completely clear. Plus, for the person that asked the question, once it gets completely finished, you need to have all your paperwork. Because if I was your background investigator, I'd say, give me everything that's pertinent to that case.
Yeah.
I kind of look at it like when you buy a house and the broker is like, okay, do you have a letter that says you discharge that debt? Because I need a copy of it. Do you have a letter that says that you have that money in the bank? Because I need a copy of it. Like okay, that's great. I believe you, but also I need a copy of it.
Yeah, cover all your bases.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And IA investigations are very similar in that they're IA investigations. If you have a lot of them and they're kind of sketchy, even though they came out in your favor, that can be an issue.
Right.
So laterals are cool because they've got the experience behind them where you can check and go, yeah, this guy was a good copper. And you should hire him because he's really, really good. Then on the other hand, there's enough experience there where there could be, personnel complaints and all this kind of stuff where you've been in that system and maybe it doesn't look so good for you. So obviously the obvious answer for laterals with regard to IA complaints is try and keep your nose as clean as possible if you think you're going to want to lateral somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And
that's the first thing they asked me.
Really?
Yeah. When I went through like 2 lateral processes, and the first thing they asked me when I met the background investigator was, do you have any IAs? Do you have any beefs? And is your shooting clear? And I was like, no, yes.
Right.
That was like a big risk management thing.
And don't think because you have a turd in your jacket, you're not going to get hired. Right. I mean,
right.
Let's face it. You can't. A really good experienced salty cop once told me, if you're doing your job, you're gonna get complaints. That's just the way it is. And so if you don't have any complaints, you're either a house mouse, right, and you're not doing your job, or you're an admin.
You're hiding something,
right? Yeah, that's true. That's true. So okay, so the second one is from Chris. And this one will get into an interesting conversation. Chris says, hey guys, I had a question and was really hoping I could get a potential answer. I'm sure you guys have been asked this 1,000 times, but I really have no one else to ask. I'm 21 and I grew up kind of rough. Long story short, I've been finding my own way and taking care of myself since I was 14. And let me tell you, I read that and I instantly felt for Chris, because there's a lot of young men out there that have that same story. And honestly, I was one of them, right? My folks got divorced. You guys have heard me talk about it a little bit, especially if you've listened to Locker Room. And I raised myself from about 13 years old on. Unfortunately, I happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and was involved in a traffic stop where someone had left a bag of weed in the car, and I ended up taking the fall for it. I was charged with possession of marijuana for sale under 2 pounds. Since then, I've worked every day to do better and avoid those types of situations and type of people that those situations tend to follow. I recently got my GED with the motivation of becoming a police officer. I love your stories and how passionate you guys are about the work you do. I'd love to be a part of this and help those who can't help themselves. I'm very passionate and have ultimately decided this is what I want to do. I guess my question for you would be, would my past and record completely disqualify me because of the juvenile felony, or would I still have a shot at this? I'd like some sort of confidence that the effort and dedication I'm going to put into trying to get into this career field isn't going to be a waste of my time or someone else's. Ken, I'll throw that to you because this is, I think, a simple answer, but also a very complicated one.
Well, it's kind of a loaded question.
Right.
Because do we know where this guy is? Is he in California?
I don't want to say where I kind of have a general idea of where he is, but I don't want to dime him off. As far as
in a state it's legal for pot.
Well, he's in his
well, generally speaking, because the thing is, most states don't. You can't convict juveniles of a crime, for one thing.
Right.
They don't get convicted of a crime, and so that's handled a little bit differently. Now, possession for sales under 2 pounds, is that a felony in his state?
Yeah, he said it was a juvenile felony.
Because a felony it makes a big difference. Because for instance, in California Post, you cannot become a police officer if you've been convicted of a felony. However, juvenile cases are handled differently. They're looked at differently than adult cases. And so that has to be looked into too. Generally speaking, it really is going to depend on the police department if they're going to hire you or not. And so it depends on the agency whether they're going to hire you or not. But that type of crime, possession of dope for sales, that's really kind of frowned upon. So I would suggest the only way for him to find out if he's going to get hired and is to apply at just a few agencies. And if he keeps getting the same answer, then I would say that it's probably going to be a no. I would say apply at maybe 3 agencies, 3 of his top agencies that he wants to get it. And see, and if you keep saying, no, we have a problem with this juvenile record, that you have, it's probably going to be a no across the board.
So, and I'll add to that. There's a couple of things. Number one, I get this other question, and I'll just get it out of the way. Yes, you should tell them, right? Well, my juvenile record is sealed. If you think a law enforcement agency can't actually look at your juvenile record during the hiring process, you have another thing coming, right? It's sure it's sealed ish. But you do need to tell them, like, don't rely on your juvenile record being sealed as a reason not to bring it up in a background. That's just first right out the gate. Would you agree, Ken?
There's a couple.
Yeah. And if you have to ask Tom if you should disclose something, then don't apply.
Yeah, that's true.
Because
that's true too.
If you're gonna lie, then just don't apply.
There's a couple issues.
Go ahead.
There's a couple issues I'm gonna see right now with that guy's background. One, yeah, it's a juvenile thing. But 2, marijuana smells. So if you couldn't tell that there was marijuana in your car with a large enough quantity for it to be considered for sales, then either 1, you're nose blind to it because you've been using it for such a long time, or 2, you're lying about something. So that's going to be something. I'm not saying he is lying. I'm just saying that's going to be.
Well, to be fair, he didn't say that he didn't know. He just said there was a bag of weed in the car that wasn't his.
That somebody left.
Right.
So then they're going to look and be like, okay, well, why were you associating with those type of people? What else were you doing? That could be a major disqualifier, not to mention you did get pinched for it. And then I have people that have come into where I work multiple times, and they're like, hey, I need a copy of my juvenile record and my rap sheet because I'm trying to get hired for this job, but they can see that I was convicted when I was juvenile, but I just need to show them that it was expunged and it was, nothing happened with it. So no, yeah, it's just because it happened when you're a juvenile doesn't mean it's sealed or whatever, unless a judge seals it. But then even then, if you're doing a deep dive into someone's background, you're going to see it because you have access to all that crap.
Right. Exactly.
The fact that it's sealed means nothing during a police background.
Right.
That's police background investigations are the only ones where you have to disclose something that's been sealed or expunged. The other thing is if you were printed, it's still going to show up on your prints. So even if the police departments trash the record and there's no reports or something, there's going to be a record that you were arrested, and so there's no point in not mentioning it.
Right. And it's going to, that could actually end up worse because what you got arrested for and then what you ultimately got charged with and what the case got disposed as might be 3 different things, right? So you get arrested for the highest possible charge they can throw at you. That's the bottom line. So yep. There's another issue with Chris. Chris says that it was possession for sales, right? That was the charge. So let's take this minute by minute, kind of the way Chuck was, or step by step. First of all, yeah, you were obviously hanging around with some dudes that were doing some illegal shit if you got charged with this, right? That's the first thing. Second thing, and I'm not saying you're lying, Chris. Obviously I don't know you, but one of the most common excuses is, it's not mine. My friend left it here. Right? That's it.
Those are my pants.
These aren't my pants. There's a reason why cops joke, these aren't my pants, right? Is because we literally get like, there's like top 10 excuses. And one of them is, I was holding it for a friend. Another one is, these aren't my pants. Another one is, like,
you put it there.
Right. Exactly.
No, I didn't.
So, yeah. So these are excuses that are given so often as to be comical, right? That doesn't mean that there aren't cases where somebody literally puts on a pair of pants that isn't theirs. But I'll tell you what, when I put on a pair of pants, first thing I do is check every pocket, right? And they're my pants, right? Like, dude, did I leave something in these pants? No, I'm usually checking
pants.
Well, if you're a doper.
Well, then, yeah, but then you're doing something funny. But I mean, like, he's in a tough spot. I mean, I'm glad he's want to do something better with his life, but at the same time, he's going to have to look at it objectively from, and not his perspective, but a law enforcement perspective. And then, he might get torn apart for it. He might not. I'm assuming he probably got it knocked down to misdemeanor possession.
Well, so there we go. So that's the question, right? So your arrest shows that you were arrested for possession for sales. Okay. What was the case disposed as? Did you plead out? And if so, did you plead out to a lesser charge? If you pled out to a lesser charge, was it disposed as a misdemeanor possession for sales, or was it disposed out as a misdemeanor simple possession case? Those kinds of things are going to affect, and that's why I said it's a simple answer, but it's also a complicated answer, because it depends on the department you're applying to. It depends on how the case was disposed. It depends on, here's another one. He says he was a juvenile, right? And now he's 21. Was he 17? Was he 16? Was he 15? Mm-hmm. How much time has passed between the arrest and where he's at now? That's a big thing. I tell people all the time. They're like, I say, don't quit smoking pot 6 months before you start applying for a police job. Mm-hmm. We talked about that last time. Because one of the things they're going to look at is, did you do this change in your life because you grew up and you matured, and now the amount of time that happened between, they're going to ask if you stole. And if you're like, yeah, I stole an action figure from Toys R Us when I was 12, and my mom caught me and she made me go return it to the store, and I had to apologize, and I got grounded for a month. Or yeah, I stole an action figure and I got arrested. I got a littering ticket. I was up on Mulholland with some friends out after curfew, and the cops stopped our car for sitting there, in Mulholland hanging out later than we were supposed to. And I was drinking a Snapple bottle, and I had thrown the lid for my Snapple outside of the car. And the guy goes, "You're drinking Snapple? There's your Snapple lid. Here's your ticket for littering." I disclosed even that on my background, right? So the question is, did you clean up your life to become a cop, or did you clean up your life and then decide to become a cop?
Well, there's a lot more to this than what he's asking. Right. So here we have this guy that he got popped for possession for sales. And then as a background investigator, I would ask, okay, so you were in a car with this guy, and it's not your dope, and you were with someone who had dope, but a significant amount of dope, enough to get arrested for sales. Something tells me, and as a police officer, you would think this too, this is not the only time. I mean, in the entire world, this is the only time I've ever been around dope. And it just happened to be this huge amount in my car. There's a lot more behind that.
Yeah. What are the odds that the one time that you had dope around you, you got popped? Slim and none, and Slim just left town.
On his way to Bible study, this gave this guy, a ride. And so there's usually more to it. So I would think, okay, there's a significant amount of dope. The people that he's with, the person that he's with, is at least a big enough player to have that much dope. How much dope did you smoke? Why were you hanging around a guy that slings dope? And
you need to have answers to all of this.
Yeah, I forgot it. And it's not that long ago that he was a juvenile. And so he's going to get hammered pretty heavily. And if they don't get him on the one thing, Another thing is that if the case has been expunged or sealed, I would, unless he got a public defender, I would go to my attorney and pull as much paperwork as I could from them and say, can I get all the court paperwork on it? Because if you tell me that that this is what happened and it was my friend, well, what does the paperwork show what your statement was? If you have a statement saying, yeah, it was not mine, it was so-and-so's, but if you tell me this is a story, I'd say prove it, because they're going to err on the side that you can't prove what you're saying. They're not going to hire you if you can't prove what you're saying.
Right. And a background investigation it's not the standard that, oh, I'm innocent until proven guilty. No. Yeah. You did exactly what we think you did, and you are the biggest piece of shit we think you are, unless you can prove otherwise. That's kind of the hermeneutic, the lens that they're going to look at your background through. So,
and let me say this. He's 21 years old, right? And most agencies are looking for, life experience, work experience, job experience. At 21 years old with this in your package, I do not see any agency hiring you.
Right.
Not now, not in the next 2 years. I don't
get a job,
see it.
Go
and
to
my
school.
best advice for him, but also if you really want to test the waters, go into the military. If you want to serve a higher calling, go into the military, because having that in your background will really help. And if the military is not going to take you, let's say the Army is not going to take you, there's a good chance that you're not going to get picked up by an agency. Now, I would probably try to go into the Army, Army, Navy, Marine Corps. Probably the Army will pick you up. They pick up a lot more folks right now, just because they're a bigger military entity. Yeah. And the Marine Corps is pretty small, and they're very picky. So the Army will most likely pick you up. If they pick you up, work there for the next 4 years. You never know, you might like it. You might make a career out of it. Then you got a retirement. But at least it'll give you 4 years of work history, job experience, keeping your nose clean. And then you get out, you go to college, do whatever you got to do, get a degree. That's 8 years, 7 years, something like that. And then you start applying. You're going to have an easier time applying then than you would now at 21, when you just got pinched for this, probably a few years ago, as opposed to a decade ago.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And the more time you have puts the cushion on it.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to hammer Chris. I mean, I applaud him for changing his life, turning it around to have a higher calling, but he just needs to do some real research and some homework to have his ducks in line for the answers to the questions he's going to be asked, and it's not going to be easy. So he needs to have that all together.
So since we're on the topic of drugs, this leads into the next thing, which we were going to talk about. Let's talk about some drug use, and we'll talk about what is easily overcomable, what is a little bit more difficult to overcome, and then what is going to kill you, sink you automatically. The big one, the easiest one, and I'll tell this story because I think I've mentioned it on the podcast, but it's just so telling. And I was in a room full of candidates when they brought everyone who was going to backgrounds into the room at the same time, gave them all the same speech, handed them all the same background packet. And then while the commander, who was in charge of backgrounds, was standing there asking if anybody had any questions, he gave his speech that Ken gave, and that I gave, and that Chuck gave. If it's in your background, put it on the sheet, right? You just do it. And one kid raises his hand, and the commander says yes, and he says, so let's say you were in another country where stuff is legal, like let's say you were in Amsterdam. What do you still have to answer those questions about drug use and prostitution if it happened outside of the country?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the commander is like, what was your name?
May keep track of that.
So I'll go with my original answer, which is, if it happened, put it on there, right? Like, they're going to look at you and say, oh, you're admitting you've been to a prostitute. Well, I was in Amsterdam and it was completely legal at the time. That might change things. It might not. You never know. But if you if you lie about it, you're sunk. Period. End of story. And let me tell you, if you don't think there's a friend of yours that will say you went to a hooker in Amsterdam to your background investigator, you don't understand your friends.
So the question isn't, have you ever engaged with a prostitute where it was legal?
Right.
That's not the question. The question is, you ever hire a prostitute? Period.
Right.
You know, and the rule of thumb is that also with regard to these things is the question is the way they're going to look at it. Have you ever done anything outside the country that's illegal in this country?
Right.
That's how they're going to judge you. They're not going to care that it was legal to smoke dope and get marijuana brownies in Amsterdam. They're going to care that it's not legal in this state.
Right. For example, if you go to Thailand and you go to a place where having sex with a 14-year-old is legal, they're going to care when you come back to the United States and apply for a job as a cop. Not that you were like, no, I was considerate enough to go somewhere where having sex with a 14-year-old was legal. No, they're going to care that you had sex with a 14-year-old.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So that's the bigger issue.
So being in answer to the overall answer is, it doesn't matter what country you're in. You have to admit to it, and they're not going to care that it's legal in that country.
Right. So weed, right? It's going to be weird for people going through backgrounds in some of the states that have legalized it. Because, for example, our chief said, I don't care if it's legal. If you do it and you get popped for it, you're going to be fired, period. And you won't be charged or prosecuted. But the bottom line is like, they can't tell unless you do a specific type of analysis. All you're going to come back is that you did it. It doesn't matter if you did it 2 weeks ago versus, 2 hours ago. They can't tell. And if you shoot somebody and you've got, cannabis in your system, you're sunk, period.
Yeah. Yeah. Discredits your whole thing. But so if you're hired and then weed becomes legal in your state, it doesn't matter because you're still basically a federal employee. It is still illegal for you to do it because it's not federally legal, it's federally illegal. But if you're living in a state where it's legal and you're a civilian and you've partaken in the legal activities because it's now legal, and then you're like, you know what, I want to be a cop, and you're like, you know what, this isn't for me, and you did it, and then 3 years later you want to be a cop, you probably, it's going to be a time gap between it. They're not going to be like, oh, well, you just smoked pot 4 months ago. Yeah, sure, come on in. But if it was like 3-4 years ago and then weed all of a sudden is legal, they're going to be like, we really don't care about weed, but have you done any of the other things like heroin, meth, ecstasy, mushrooms, shit like that? And generally it's like the top 3: cocaine, heroin, and meth, or crack or whatever. And those are going to be major disqualifiers. But generally marijuana is kind of looked at like, whatever, in states that it's legal. But if you're an employee already hired and then it becomes legal, it's still a no-no. You still can't do it. It's completely illegal and you'll be fired for it. You may not be charged for it, but you'll 100% be fired for it.
So can you give us go on with what you're saying? I'm sorry, but can you also give us in your answer the list of drugs you would say are automatically no-nos?
Well, first, let me go back to the marijuana thing, is that because it's it's still federally illegal to do marijuana. It's going to be up to the department. They're going to have standards. You can use this much marijuana before we're not going to hire you. But even in states like California, Colorado, or Oregon and stuff where marijuana is legal, for police hires, they're going to go by their standards. They're not going to go by the state standards, and it's still illegal federally, and that's what they're going to go by. Yeah,
they're going to say you violated federal law.
They're going to go by the standard. Correct. Even today, to this day, like LAPD in a city like Los Angeles, a super liberal city, there you can still get DQ'd for marijuana, even medical marijuana, because it's not legal in federal. That's the standard. For some reason, they don't want to let go of that. I thought marijuana was legalized before I left LAPD backgrounds, and I thought, okay, it's going to be a done deal. And then years later, they still they still DQ people for marijuana. So there's some reason they don't want to let go of that federal standard. So so your question is what types of drugs are going to be problematic as far as automatic DQs, right?
Yeah, Ken's list of drug no-nos.
So let me preface it with this. Of all the things with regard to background investigations, every standard that there is, for background investigators, the drug standards are the holy grail of backgrounds. If you call up any unit, if you're a police officer, if you are an applicant or whoever you are, they're very hesitant to give up the standards for drugs. And so I tread lightly. It's like this secret oath that you take. I shall never disclose background on drug standards. But so here we go.
That being said, you'll tell us as much as you can.
Bad.
You're right.
I'll tell you as much as I can without getting into the numbers are what's important. And so, for instance, generally speaking, LSD, heroin, injectable steroids, bad. Cocaine, ecstasy.
I'm guessing PCP is on that list.
PCP is bad.
Right.
Those are the kind of things that are those are bad. And things, there are other ones like cocaine, ecstasy, stuff like that, where a lot of departments will let you get away with X amount of use.
Right.
The number
and time in between.
High.
Right. And time in between your last usage and your application date. Doesn't that make a big difference as well?
The time, it does not for hard drugs.
Really?
Time and distance doesn't matter for hard drugs. The amount matters. So you can have shot up heroin when you were 15 and now you're 40. They're not going to care. Use tabs of acid when you were 20. They're not going to care. It's the type of drug and how many times you've used it. And some of the hardcore drugs are one use.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Period. So,
and then some of those other ones, this is what kind of interesting to me, is that you've got marijuana is a Schedule I drug federally, right? Which means that, no medical use, high potential for addiction, no way, no how, should never touch it. That's how the feds have categorized it for years. Cocaine and methamphetamine, on the other hand, are Schedule II, which, the federal government even recognizes, okay, cocaine and methamphetamine are bad, but they do have a medical use. And yet methamphetamine and cocaine will kill your background faster than pot will.
Yeah. and it really, across the country, it just depends on what agency you apply with. But some agencies will publish, you can go on their website and they'll say, yeah, if you've used this, that, and the other, yeah, it's a no-go. And some, they don't even list it. They don't even list the drugs that are bad.
Right.
And, and it's interesting. It doesn't matter what state you're in. For instance, take Oregon. Oregon is like the liberal poster child of the United States. And you're probably not going to get by with many drugs there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
for a police
true.
position.
Yeah. And I think that's true nationwide. It doesn't matter how liberal it is for civilians. You're not applying for a civilian job. And, the standard is different. That's just the bottom line. You can complain about it all you want, but, complain about that if you're in the Marine Corps and you get bounced with a, dishonorable for conduct unbecoming, it's something that under normal circumstances wouldn't have been a big deal to other employers, but it sure as hell is a big deal to the military. Well, guess what? Police departments, if you don't think that they have their own ability to bounce you for conduct unbecoming, you're wrong. They do. And if an agency, let's put it this way, if any agency you're applying with has the ability to bounce you for conduct unbecoming, you can automatically assume that the standards for employment are higher than they would be for a civilian. And you can complain that it's not fair. You can complain, but that's just the nature of the beast. So if you're applying for these jobs in any sort of law enforcement and you have these things in your background that are automatic disqualifiers, yeah, just understand that you're screwed.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's tough for police departments because it puts them in a compromising position in that you did these drugs, and now you want us to give you a gun and a badge, and we want you to arrest these people who did the drugs you did. And then when it gets to court, you want to testify against these people and put them in jail for the thing that you did. And so if that ever got out, if some narco detective ever found out that they were doing all these drugs and stuff, and now they're the biggest narco, they have the biggest narco arrests on the department, and they were in fact doing that can be an issue.
Yep.
And I'll add on to that when you do work narco, right? People talk about learning to simulate drug use when working narco and how you have to, learn how to do that because you can't take the drugs. Well, I'll tell you, at least in California, theoretically, right, when a narcotics officer participates in drug sales, they would be under normal circumstances violating the law, but they get immunity because of the job they're doing while they're, conducting drug enforcement. That theoretically would also apply to drug use. But I could tell you also that despite the fact that if you were undercover and had to use drugs to save your life, that would also be your last day as a cop.
Yeah.
If you have to do that, you're gone. You're done. Right. You're not going to get charged with drug use because it wasn't illegal when you did it. It was legal because you were working under the auspices of doing an investigation. However, the fact that you did it one time, boom, you might, at a minimum, you're riding a desk, scheduling things for the captain for the rest of your career, but probably fired.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would probably say fired. That's like being a vice operator and doing like a sting with a prostitute, and your takedown team doesn't come in fast enough. And then
so you actually have sex with her.
Yeah. And then you're just like, that's, I mean, and
Your Honor, I was just staying in character.
That's right.
And to be honest, being a good operator, you're going to have to learn how to like stall and stuff like that, and there's tricks of the trade in doing certain things. But yeah, those two things would kill your career really quick. Yeah. And because you can't prosecute that case now. You can't. You use drugs. You violated law. You violated department policies on both of those accounts. I mean, you just can't.
I knew there was a really well-known SWAT operator on LAPD. Everybody knew him. In fact, Tom, your dad probably knows who he is if I was to mention his name. And he was so well known. And then years later in the 90s, I was doing some door knocks for backgrounds, and he answers the door. And I go, dude, I was talking to him and everything. This guy was famous, a famous SWAT operator.
I've got about three names floating around in my head that I can guess.
Yeah, you'll know who it is. Uh-huh. And so I was talking to him a little bit, and he told me that he was working some narco thing, and he just couldn't help himself, and he got into the narco and he got hooked and all that. And he told me that the department found out and he got fired, but the department took care of him. They got him into treatment, got to make sure he was well and everything, but they had to fire him. So
yeah. There's really nothing you can do at that point. It's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you can complain that it's not fair, but real cops will know. You can look at, there's a movie out if you want to watch it. Takes place in the 70s. It's called Rush. Jason Patric and Jennifer Jason Leigh. That movie is based on a novel written by a female UC who, while working undercover, did shady shit up to and including using drugs for real while undercover. And she ended up going to prison. And the reason she ended up going to prison was because they were basically told to manufacture cases against people that they knew were dirty but couldn't get. So it's not as if these things aren't possible. They are absolutely possible. I know guys that have worked undercover, and they've told me, man, you get, one guy was undercover with the HA, and he told me that what was thrashing his body was that he had to use so much caffeine just to keep up with these tweakers that he was undercover with, that he wasn't doing illegal drugs, but he was wrecking his body because of lack of sleep and not eating properly and using as much caffeine as humanly possible to stay awake and keep up with these dudes. So undercover work is not for everybody. It is absolutely not for everybody. You also have to be able to think like I know cops that wouldn't survive a day. I would probably say 80% of cops wouldn't survive a day working undercover. They'd botch a case, they'd get made. There's all these kinds of things that would happen. Being able to do it is a skill, and it's being able to stay out of trouble while you're doing it is a mindset, right? Like, don't cross a certain line, and no case is worth crossing that line.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
Anyway, I can tell you I loved working undercover, but it also, having your children playing in the living room with your wife while your work phone rings and then having to disappear into the garage so you can have a conversation about buying large quantities of dope and machine guns, and you're all the time thinking, I really hope this fucker doesn't figure out where I live.
Don't undercover guys have to take polys during their tours?
I didn't.
Or is that just before? Maybe not even before?
Not even before.
I thought they did.
Yeah, I took the poly when I got hired.
I think every agency is different.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet that that's true. But for us, it was a small enough agency where, and hey, I knew a guy that got shit canned for popping hot for THC. And according to him, he was using a workout supplement that contained, and it might have contained CBD. It might have contained whatever substance it was. That he claimed in his Board of Rights, he claimed that this substance that he used to work out with had a warning on it that said you could pop hot if you use this as a supplement and you get piss tested. Well, he got fired. And the bottom line is if he looked at that label and saw that it said you could pop hot on a piss test, pick a different supplement. Like, are you really that married to that brand of supplement that you're willing to take the risk that you're going to pop hot on a piss test?
Well, yeah, there was a whole thing going around. It probably 2000, let's say 10, 11, 12, around that time, and even earlier, where there was a supplement out there. It was a pre-workout. And it was it would jack you up so much with just energy. And they started realizing it, people in, military, police and stuff like that were using it were popping hot because it was mimicking the effects in meth.
Is that Redline?
Well, it was just a substance that a lot of these companies were using. And Jacked was using it. A lot of companies were using it. And I want to say it's starts like a D or something. But it was something dimethyl something. Well, meth is right in the name.
Right.
And it was mimicking the effects of methamphetamine, but it wasn't methamphetamine, but it would give you a false positive on the test.
Because it would create a metabolite in your bloodstream that would look like,
Fuck that. Why would you want to put that into your body? Like,
because they want to get swole. They want those sleeves on their Class B uniform to be super tight around the bicep.
But here's the thing. That's not, everyone's like, oh, it jacks you up. I'm going to get so ripped. No, you're not. It's not going to make you any buffer. It's not going to make you any more ripped. What it's going to do is it's going to jack your heart rate up. It's going to cause you to have a fucking heart attack. I mean, just go and get some green coffee or some regular pre-workout that gives you a little bit of energy, gives you that little beta alanine in there, gives you a little bit of itch. It makes you feel like it's doing something, but really it just gives you a little bit of energy to stay awake for a workout that you're going to be, exhausting yourself in. But why the hell would you want to jack your heart rate through the fucking roof to work out? Because it's not going to do you any good. It'd be like, oh, it's going to pump the oxygen and blood through no, dude, it's going to explode your heart. Go drink a Bang or a Red Bull or something.
Chuck, you bring up a good topic that we should have a whole episode on, which is we should have a firefighter and a cop and a veteran on, and we should talk about lifestyle decisions that are common mistakes that, I was told the 3 B's: bills, broads, and booze, right? The 3 B's are what are going to get you fired every time. And I can't even tell you how many cops I've seen lose their job over one of those three Bs. I will also say that the number one I've seen is broads, right? Bills, broads, and booze. It was broads was number one, booze was number two, and bills was number three. But it's one of those three usually. So,
getting back to I guess got one more thing. Just getting back to what Chuck was saying about the supplements and things like that. A word of advice for applicants: don't do supplements. The reason is because when it comes to these supplements, there's this little word playing game that they like to do. Yes, I did steroids. Some departments go, "Oh, you did steroids? No, you're done." Or it could be something that mimics this or that, the other thing. If you have in fact done some kind of supplement, you better get all the chemicals that are in that supplement, because a lot of times they go, "Oh, it was given to me by my trainer friend, and he gave it to me, and blah blah blah, and I think it was this." And then they go back after they get DQ'd and say, "Oh, I found out from my buddy that this was what it was. It wasn't a steroid." And then by that time, it's too late. So if you're going to take supplements, you better know what you're taking.
Well, and so that brings up a good point, and I'll bring this up, and hopefully, Ken, you can give me your thoughts on it, because this actually happened to somebody I know. There are places where you can go through the police academy privately. In California, there's several. I don't know about nationwide, but I would assume there's at least more than one nationwide if California's got several. And it is for lack of a better word, it's a trade school, right? It's usually attached to a college. The college has a law enforcement academy or a fire academy program. You pay to go through it. You put yourself through it. You cover all the expenses that are associated with it. You can even get student loans, I think, to go to them. And then the idea is smaller departments who don't necessarily have the budget to send somebody to the police academy will oftentimes go and recruit out of these academy classes, because they're like, "Hey, these candidates look even better to us because they've already put themselves through the police academy. It's an expense we don't have to adopt. They've also already shown a dedication to doing the career, and they've, like Chuck said, going to the military and proving yourself. So going to the police academy could be a way of proving yourself. And also the academy staff is going to have had a look at you for 6 months. And in that 6 months, they've all been cops. They've all been training officers. They don't hire people for a police academy that haven't done the job. So they're going to be able to make recommendations and say, yeah, this dude's squared away, and then that might help you overcome some of these things that are speed bumps in a background at an agency where they're going to hire you sight unseen. Well, now you're not sight unseen. But from that perspective, what ended up happening is a young man did the instruction block involving narcotics and drug use and drug possession and drug effects. And this guy thought that he had done LSD and learned through the police academy that he'd been ripped off. And so, wow. Yeah, so it was kind of one of those things where we'd talked about it later, and he's like, yeah, my background investigator was like, what drugs have you done? And he said, look, when I was a teenager, I thought that I had done LSD, but I don't think that's what it was. And the background investigator's like, well, time out, explain that to me. So he had said that he was with a buddy, and his buddy said, hey, let's do this LSD. And he got a pill instead of a paper tab and took the pill and stayed up all night. And that was it. Right. And so when you go through the academy, you learn that that's not what LSD does. And that's not how LSD is typically administered. So he was able to look at the background investigator and say, I honestly don't know. It could have been a caffeine pill. It could have been some sort of amphetamine. It could have been any number of things. But the bottom line is, this is what my buddy said to me. This is what he handed to me. This is the effects that happened because of it. And I'm being totally honest, because I can honestly say, after having been to the police academy, I don't know. And it was interesting because that was a similar answer to one of my answers after I had gone to the police academy during a background, which was, how many times have you ever knowingly driven over the legal, or how many times have you ever driven while over the legal limit for alcohol? And I looked at my background investigator. I said, I don't know. And he goes, what? Like, you've done it that many times? I said, no, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, if you had asked me that before the police academy, I would have said never. But now, having been to the police academy and understanding that a 0.08 blood alcohol level can be very deceptive and you could be over the legal limit and not know it, I can honestly tell you, I don't know if I've ever driven at, I know I've had drinks and I know I've felt fine enough to drive and I know I've driven home, but I also don't know, because I didn't have a breathalyzer, if I was over the legal limit. What would you say in those cases? How is that approach and how does that affect things?
As far as the, for instance, the LSD thing,
Mm-hmm.
if he hasn't copped out to using LSD and saying, I don't think I used LSD, I think somebody ripped me off, gave me a caffeine pill or something like that, then you would not answer yes to the question that I used LSD, because the background investigator, the minute you open that Pandora's box and you let out, I think I used LSD, there is no way to disprove it.
Right.
You can go back later, because it always happens. Oh, after I got DQ'd, I went back and I asked my buddy and he said, no, I gave you a caffeine pill. So here's that now. And the only proof that you have is you changed your story. So they're probably not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. The other thing with the DUIs and things like that, well, that's something that generally you need to have an answer, because the background investigator generally is going to go by your first answer. If you say, yeah, I drove DUI a bunch of times, and then because the background investigator looks at you and says, what? Oh no, I changed my mind. Here's another story. The background investigator is going to go with the first story. Right. And you're going to have to prove him otherwise, and it's impossible.
Right. And look at those questions, because a lot of those questions, if you answer yes and it says, if yes, please explain, those are the questions they're going to dig into, because that's what they want to know. So you better have your ducks in a row. You can't go in there. Yeah. Again, this goes back to what we said the first episode. Prep. Have all of your information ready. Understand what they're going to ask you. And again, I will say, this is why for those of you who don't have family or friends in law enforcement, and all you have is this podcast, reach out to Ken because this clearly isn't his first rodeo. So Ken, how can they reach out to you again?
If your listeners go to policebackground.net, all the information about me, they can find out all about me and my experience. And then there's a contact form on there. Just fill out the contact form. I'll get in touch with them and I will we'll discuss what they need. And generally speaking, most people who contact me need a full background review, and I'll set it up for them. And I'll go through the entire background, their PHS. I send them a PIQ, which is an additional questionnaire. Then we do a video conference and I ask them the exact same questions any experienced background investigator is going to ask them. When they get done, they'll know exactly what to expect. And I'll ask them the questions that need to be asked and have them tailor their answers for that particular question, so they don't shoot themselves in the foot.
Right. Because sometimes it's not even a question of having the quote unquote right answer. It's a question of not answering it in an incomplete or an incorrect way. It's about articulation. And let's face it,
correct.
When you get into this job and you start doing this job, articulation is everything. Every time you write a report. Yeah. So you better get used to being able to correctly and articulately explain the facts. And there's no better way to start than with your background investigator.
So. Yeah. And that when I get done with the consultation with these candidates, there won't be any surprises.
Right.
I look at it and I ask them exactly the same questions.
Well, Ken, we appreciate you coming back on. So normally we allow our guests to pick an officer or a firefighter or a veteran who was killed in the line of duty. But Ken has said that we can go ahead and pick somebody. And we all kind of agreed that for this episode, we wanted to dedicate it to New Mexico State Police Officer Darian Jarrett, he initiated a traffic stop on a Chevy pickup on I-10 in New Mexico, and he was ambushed essentially. And the video is pretty horrific. I don't recommend anybody needs to look it up unless you're going to be using it for training purposes, because it's unfortunately tragic and atrocious what this drug cartel drug dealer did to this officer. But he basically ambushed him with an AR-15 style rifle and shot and killed right at the back of the truck, just right where he stood. And so we wanted to dedicate this episode to Officer Darian Jarrett of the New Mexico State Police. Rest easy, brother. We've got it from here. I appreciate you coming on, Ken, as always. I still want to have you on to tell some of your work stories instead of just talking about background. I also met somebody recently that it'll be interesting because they were a police officer in California for a couple of agencies, and now they work for the Washington AG's office. And it was an interesting job. They work basically investigating any claim filed against the state of Washington, whether it's a lawsuit or just a claimant, everything from workers' comp to misconduct. It automatically gets sent to him and his bureau, and they go about the state and just investigate every single thing about every single claim. So if you think that a state would have an investigator specifically tasked just to investigate workers' comp and other claims against the state, wouldn't have a team of trained background investigators to poke through your background with a fine-tooth comb, you got another thing coming.
Yep.
Especially because they're going to give you a badge and a gun and the ability to deprive people of their life and their liberty. So it's a big responsibility, and none of us took it lightly. Unfortunately, nowadays, a lot of people seem to think we do. And there's some training issues that we've already gone into on previous episodes that are causing some issues nationwide in this profession. But for those of you that are listening, that are thinking about becoming a police officer, or for those of you that are out there right now in your patrol car on graveyard shift saying, oh man, every week I look forward to Chuck and Tom and sitting down with another guest and discussing these issues. We're glad, because I know I could have used it when I was in my patrol car, and it makes you feel less crazy, it makes you feel less alone, and makes you feel like there are still good people out there that have your back. So until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.